Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'd like to talk today about one of our biggest shared challenges, a challenge facing Britain, America and countries and cities across Europe in equal measure. And that's ensuring that the advancement of technology is for the benefit of everyone in society. In the US, the UK and other countries around the world, we're experiencing a period of historic change and uncertainty. This is affecting our politics, our economies and our societies. This truth is we don't yet have all the answers, but there are some undeniable common threads. Growing groups of people who feel increasingly left behind by deindustrialization and globalization, and the way technology has and still is profoundly changing our economies and our way of life. The dominant characteristic is the unprecedented scale and speed of change, especially change driven by technology. We see it all around us. Technology is disrupting and shifting the way we do everything. The nature of our economies and the types of jobs available, where we live and how we travel, the way we consume news and process information, and vitally, the way we communicate and interact with one another. How we deal with this transformation will be a defining challenge of the 21st century, because it cuts across so many layers of our society, politics, economics, and the general well-being of modern citizens. The question now is not only how we utilize this new technology for the benefit of everyone in our society, how we use it to reduce inequality and to maintain decent employment rights. Just as significant is how we prevent harm to the social cohesion of our communities and how we interact with one another. With these types of profound questions, we rely on the principled judgments made by the innovators themselves. But the public also has a right to be heard and a right to expect democratic leaders to guide them along this delicate path. And this is something I believe has been absent in recent years. We've been through major technology revolutions before. Overall, we've come out stronger and more prosperous. These advances have brought us some of humanity's greatest accomplishments. The first industrial revolution, born in Britain, not only changed my country, but the rest of the world. We had the rise of the middle class for the first time, and the innovations that were developed, such as the steam train and new machinery, contributed to the advancement of agriculture, industry and trade. But it also led to unrest and protests from the Luddites who feared for their textile jobs, and to an era of greater pollution, child labour and unsafe working conditions before the advent of trade unions and proper employment laws. All revolutions are by their very nature disruptive, but this fourth industrial revolution that we're going through now is different. It's different to those that came before, with far greater risks. We're now in a new era where exponential change can happen and spread across the world faster than ever before. And just as many have felt marginalized by shifts away from manufacturing and blue-collar industries, for today's workers, there's a fear that new technology is bypassing the skills they've spent their lifetime developing, and the social contract struck by the post-war generation on employment rights rights that were hard won and decades in the making. If managed poorly, and if tech sectors are tempted to reap the rewards of their innovations without a care for their wider impact, I fear all this change risks an age of unprecedented inequality and division that could undermine the pillars and key institutions of our society. Another example of the opportunities and risks ahead is the growing gig economy. While the social media revolution has changed the way we create, share and consume creative content, peer-to-peer platforms are changing the way people monetize their skills and time. This has the potential to fundamentally impact the way we view employment. At its best, the sharing economy can make it easier for people to sell their skills, their time, and even their home in a way that suits them at a fair price. But at its worst, it can drive down pay, workers' rights, and safety standards. If the sharing economy is real, it should be as liberating for the worker or supplier as it is for the consumer. Yes, innovative new companies are providing fantastic services to people around the world and have created tens of thousands of new jobs in the process. But without prudent regulation and oversight, this new way of doing business risks being used as cover to break up decades of established and hard-fought rights. We must now ask whether it's acceptable for platforms in the quick pursuit for market share to be allowed to set a price which is too low to adequately reward workers, while at the same time incentivizing people to work just like full-time employees. Companies that behave in this way are not genuine peer-to-peer platforms, they're simply companies, service providers or retailers with an app. There's nothing wrong with this, but we can't confuse matters by thinking that because a business is smart, disruptive, popular even, and has a really neat app, it somehow has a right to behave in a different regulatory status to its competitors. Ultimately, there must be greater responsibility taken by some tech companies for the impact they're having on the world. And crucially, no business or industry should ever consider itself above the local rules or laws set by democratic processes. In London, we've been clear with Uber and other companies that everyone, no matter how big, must play by the rules, no exceptions. Now, I appreciate that some of these companies can afford to spend a fortune on an array of lawyers and PR experts, and they do. However, in the long run, attempts to subvert, bypass, or turn the public against proper regulation doesn't do anyone any favours. But I want to be clear, the onus for change should not just be on tech companies and innovators. One of the biggest problems over the last few years is that politicians and governments have just been passive, sitting on their hands, while the tech revolution has happened around them. There's been a failure to ensure that our economies and our regulatory structures are prepared and relevant. It must ultimately fall to government, working with tech businesses and leaders to ensure that this revolution is not detrimental to our long-term process and progress. Put simply, there's been a dereliction of duty on the part of politicians and policymakers to ensure that the rapid growth in technology is utilised and steered in a direction that benefits us all. Rather than blaming companies for innovating ahead of regulation, politicians must fix things when the regulation is out of date. The question now for governments or traditional sectors should not be how to slow down innovation in its tracks, because we can't and we shouldn't. It should be how we mitigate against the potentially negative impacts of disruption. And more than that, how can we harness the very same technologies to drive up standards and to create more just and equal societies? You know, it was the great US President, JFK, who said in 1960, "The new frontiers will present us with both dangers and opportunities. Our task is to overcome those dangers and seize those opportunities." We should see the true threat as the failure of tech companies to appreciate the responsibility they have to wider society and the failure of policymakers to adapt. Ladies and gentlemen, the good news is that we're only just at the beginning of this journey. And if the companies and politicians at all levels of government can work together to shape the future of tech, then I remain optimistic that we can utilize technology to create fairer, more united cities and countries, and optimistic that we can work together to instill hope for a better, more inclusive future for us all. Thank you very much.